Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. I hope you had an amazing weekend and a great holiday. Today, viewers just like you sent in what they claim to be true and creepy experiences with cryptid creatures. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a cryptid story or something else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Stories like yours that help keep this show going. Now, without further ado, let's get into these creepy stories sent in by viewers just like you. Alright. So when I was little, I used to live in the Philippines, and there are so many stories about the Aswang and Capri there. Most of my family has encountered them, making them believers, but I have never encountered such a foul creature. But one day, we had to stay at my auntie's house because that's where we would stay whenever we go to Marikina, a place near Manila in the Philippines. Some of my family members that were there with us mentioned that the house had not been blessed and that it was likely haunted. One night, my mom woke up suddenly. She got up and left the room to use the bathroom. As she was walking down the stairs to the bathroom, she claims to have seen what looked like a random guy with a hat walk past her and go down the stairs and walk outside of the house. At first, she thought it was just my oldest brother just wanting some fresh air, so she thought nothing much of it and proceeded to use the bathroom. After doing her business, she went to go and check on who she thought was my brother, only to discover the front of the house was empty. She went up to the other room and saw everyone asleep, and she got chills, but ultimately just went back to bed. The one I encountered, though, wasn't like any other story I've ever heard about. I was in the room with my mom, auntie, grandma, and uncle. My mom and I had a thing to sleep on the floor while my granny and aunt and uncle slept on the bed. I was sitting on the floor bed as I looked on the doorway. The door was opening, and I saw a hand slowly reach out and just slowly started reaching and stretching out toward me. I started crying and freaking out and pointed at it and started hiding under the blanket, as everyone was clueless and didn't see anything. I then hid behind my mom as I looked up to the bed. My uncle had his back turned against me and my mom, but from where he was facing the wall, the same hand looks like it's stretching and raising its hand from me, and I scream, "Ma, I see a hand." But she was oblivious to what I was seeing and didn't care. I went to sleep under my blanket while my family was just having a normal conversation in the room. It's not the scariest story, but this is my encounter with these creatures, and thank you for sharing if you end up doing it. I was camping, and there was something out there with us. I could hear it all over the area, like it was stalking us, but I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want them to panic. It never came close enough to bug us, but I could tell if we had passed into the woods any deeper, the creature was just there waiting for us. It's definitely not a Wendigo or a skinwalker. It was something else, something more akin to the rake maybe, but it was so wrong. It was tall, thin, and white, with piss yellow eyes and black stains of like... Do you guys know Golem from Lord of the Rings? It had black strains of hair like that, just absolutely sickly looking. I only saw it once for a split second. It was on the last day, but it was all I needed to see, because when I saw it, I knew it had been following us for days on the edge of the woods. We had been camping, and this thing had to be some kind of demon or mythic creature that humans were never meant to deal with alone, as it wasn't natural. It somehow kept up with us the whole way. When I looked back, it was practically right on our bumper. I know there's no outrunning it, and if that's true, it stands to reason it's probably too strong for us to fight outright. I don't shy away from anything though. It does make me contemplate if I'd be nothing more than a momentary speed bump in its life if I had decided to attack it, or if it had decided to attack us. Stay safe out there, everyone. I know my story is short, and definitely not too detailed. I just wanted to cut off all the other story stuff because the only thing that matters was this encounter and sighting. I'll start by saying no, this isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends through the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog or wolf story. I have since asked each friend over the years and miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's call him Jay, he and our other friends were about 17 to 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike and do this and puff. The good old days, when we got away from parents and had a day planned around just smoking. Simpler times. It was Jay and his best friend B and their girlfriends S and M. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they are on, the main one that connects the parking lot to the river. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there is a very small bridge that crosses a small creek. This will be relevant for later. The group spent the day out there, swimming and puffing and swimming, just being typical Oregon teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours. As the sun began to set, either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This path has since been paved, according to Google Maps. It doesn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot they had crossed when they had hiked in. When they reached this small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain, and noticed a huge dog near the tree line. It was roughly about 100 yards away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog. It was starting to get dark, but from M and J's descriptions, and the drawings he did for me later in 2005, it was very shaggy and furry. I may even still have the notebook where she drew the dog thing in it. If I find it, I'll share it. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer. When they had seen it a couple of seconds earlier, it was on all fours, like I said, and much further away. It had traversed most of the large field in seconds. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and incredibly stealthy. My four friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, "I can't get the key" in moment, because B was fumbling madly for the keys. At this point, the dog was standing on its hind legs, at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them. It still had the dog face, still had the dog body, but it was standing up. They never saw it walking on all fours, just two. It was like every time they looked up, it was just standing there, closer and closer. As Jay had said, every time they looked up, he was closer but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs like that. They said this thing was super tall though. Like, they thought it was easily like 6.5 to 7 feet maybe. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they described it. Many times I asked them, "Are you sure it wasn't a bear?" And they definitely know it wasn't a bear. They're for sure that it was a dog standing on its hind legs, a big dog that was stalking them. This all happened in Lane County, Oregon, in the year of 2000. There are a few bears, if any, out there, but it would be odd. But then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisgah dog to his own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't even like talking about the incident at all because it's too creepy for her to recall. This story takes place in the deserts of Arizona. Me and my dad are on a camping trip with the rest of our family, but thanks to the size of my family, we had to take 2 cars. One car was just for boys and one for girls. I had 3 sisters, but I was the only boy. 3 hours later, and nightfall approaches, making it harder to drive with only one headlight working at the time, so my dad decides we should stop and camp there for the night. I said I was down as long as we sleep in the car. That's not really camping, but if you had to choose between a car seat and the ground, then I think you know what I was doing. Anyways, he agreed, so we drove off the road onto the sand with cactus as far as you could see. We both began our descent into slumber, only I couldn't as I was a bit of an insomniac, which I was fine with. It just meant I could look up at the night sky and enjoy it. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a blood-curdling screech of some kind, coming from somewhere in the vast emptiness of the desert. At first, I thought it was a coyote, but coyote doesn't really sound like that. Frozen solid, I look out the window to see a tall, lanky creature standing on all 4s. Its appendages were extremely long and unnatural looking. At first glance, it would have been just blending in with the cacti surrounding the area, with its seemingly prickly skin. But I didn't just peek and look away. I was flat out staring at it until my eyes locked with its 2 small white dots. I believe these were its eyes. I am dropping bricks in my pants at this point, but those bricks turned to boulders as it full out charges at the small car, which could easily be flipped with little effort. I guess with all that commotion, my dad must have woken up, because before I knew it, we were driving off of the sand back onto the road, flooring it. Suddenly, the back window was smashed in with the creature slamming its 2-fingered hand into the glass screen, sending shards everywhere. It didn't follow us for much longer, as it had glass shrapnel in its hand. It started to slow down and limp away, leaving blood marks on the back door. We kept driving without looking back, fearing to see it again. Eventually, we had to stop as we caught up with the rest of the family. Once there, we all shared the same expressions on our faces. It was a look of terror. That day is one I'll never forget. As it happened in Scotland, I was told it could not be a skinwalker. So when I found this show, I thought I'd share it here and see what you all think. Some things I'd like to note. While I don't live in a tiny village like this encounter happened in, I do live in a small town in Scotland, so I am familiar with many animal sounds. It was not an owl or a fox, both of which I'm very familiar with as I live near a lot of them. I hope you all enjoy reading my experience. So, a little over 1.5 years ago, I went to stay with my grandmother in the countryside. She lives in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. My grandfather has recently passed after a long illness. I was worried she might be lonely, so I went to stay for a while. One night there, it was perhaps 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep, so I was on my laptop in the guest bedroom that had formerly belonged to my grandfather. It had new furniture, etc. to make it a guest room, as his hospital bed and all that were taken back. As I'm on my laptop, I hear what sounds like a flock of chickens going by the window, going nuts and clucking. I think nothing of this and chuckle to myself, thinking the neighbor's chickens had gotten out. I'm about to go check the window, thinking that there's something going on. Maybe if I just put some food out and try to herd them into the garden, maybe they'll, leave me alone and stay in that one area and not get lost before I reach the window. However, the noise of chickens changes and begins to blend together into a noise that gets louder and louder until it doesn't sound like chickens anymore. It sounds like a screaming that has me frozen in place. It no longer sounded like multiple voices of animal, so I knew it wasn't a flock of chickens being attacked by a fox or something. It was now a hellish screaming noise that was directly outside my window, which was thankfully covered by curtains. It stayed at my window for perhaps 5, maybe even 10 minutes while I'm frozen from fear in the middle of the room, before it left and I could hear the screaming get more and more distant until it was gone. I honestly have no idea what I heard and was too scared to talk to my grandmother about it the next day. Do any of you have any idea what this could be, or any thoughts on what happened? It was about a month ago that I learned of what these crawlers were. While listening to your podcast, describe encounters with these said creatures, I finally learned the name of what I feel best describes of what I saw in 2002 and 2003. Both of my encounters take place along the Texas border and Mexico. The first encounter, I was with a friend exploring irrigation canals at night, on the farmlands near my house. Honestly, I couldn't really give you a reason why. We were just bored. These canals are elevated about 20 feet or so, and the water is down at the bottom of the trench. While driving, the truck's headlights illuminated a small, lanky, gray and white creature on the side of the canal. As soon as the headlights hit the crawler, it leaped into the darkness of the canal, with similar ease as a cat might jump. Both my friend and I immediately shouted, "What the heck is that?" The chupacabra is my area's local cryptid legend, so we immediately assumed that, until I heard of the existence of the crawler. I had been thinking a chupacabra was what I saw, or some type of alien, but descriptions of the chupacabra don't accurately describe this crawler. The many descriptions of the crawler are spot on with what I saw. The second encounter was at my house. Occasionally, I would climb up onto the second story of my family home for a bit of stargazing. While laying on my back, staring into the sky, I heard a noise coming from the other end of the roof. Thinking it was probably a possum messing around, I tilted my head from the sky to the direction of the sound. Something was slowly moving towards me in the dark, from the end of the roof. For a few moments, I stayed in place just trying to figure out what this was. Trying to focus and make a solid identification of what animal was coming toward me. It wasn't until the creature got about halfway across the roof. My eyes could finally pick up on the features, disqualifying it from being any other animal native to my area. It looked like a small hairless person, crawling on its lanky hands and feet. Needless to say, I didn't stick around any longer. I hauled ass down the tree I'd come up on, back to the safety of my house. I don't know where it went after that. Thank you for sharing my story, and I hope somebody who's listening can possibly help me understand crawlers more. A couple of years ago, I had a weird encounter behind my house. There's a bunch of trees and manzanita bushes behind my house as well. Typical Northern California flora. My black lab was outside around 11:30 p.m. when she let out the most scared-sounding bark I've ever heard. I went out to see what was happening and what she was barking at, and started shining my flashlight around. I didn't initially see anything. The dog barked again, and I caught sight of the humanoid creature as it shifted positions. It was maybe 15 feet away from me. The encounter lasted probably only 2 minutes. The creature was very geometric and generally thin. Its body was rectangular, maybe 2 feet across, long and vertically oriented. No tapering at either hip or shoulder. It was partially rounded on the edges, but I would hesitate to describe it as being cylindrical. Its arms seemed longer than its legs, though I admit it could have been crouching. Depending on whether it was crouching or not, I would say it was most likely between 5 and 7 feet tall. At the end of each thin arm was a hand with 6 fingers, long and almost bony. 3 of the fingers were really thick, while the other 3 were much thinner. It had a thin neck, thinner than its arms. Its head is the part that really freaked me out. It was as wide as its body and totally featureless. No face, no ears, nothing. There was nothing there to indicate that this thing had any eyes or mouth. The head was wider at the top than the bottom, still processing that rectangular cylindrical appearance as the body. Its overall appearance was unnaturally smooth. Its lines were too straight, and the exterior was an incredible shiny black color. I shined my light on the creature more directly, and in spite of not appearing to have any eyes, it seemed to hone in on the flashlight beam, sort of tilting its head and partially pulling itself from behind the tall grass and fallen limb. It had no sound when it moved, even though I could see the grass moving and see a rather large branch snap as it shifted its weight. I couldn't tell if I thought it was a predator or prey, or if it even thought about me at all. At this point, I decided I didn't want to stick around to find out what it was doing or why. I'm very scientifically minded. I seek to find a rational explanation for things before entertaining the notion that it could be some sort of supernatural phenomenon. I probably would have discounted the whole thing as my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark had my dog not been so visibly perturbed by the whole thing. I've never seen her shake like that. There are deer, mountain lions, coyote, all kind of animals around my house. She doesn't care about any of them. We've been face to face with mountain lions many times. Whatever this was left her scared to go outside for several days afterward. I wouldn't describe this encounter as negative. Terrifying, yes, but the unknown often is. I haven't seen the creature again. I still get goosebumps every time I think about it. Has anyone ever seen anything like this creature I've described? I'd love to get some opinions on my encounter. Most of my life I've lived in the country. I've encountered quite a few scary things in my life, especially out in the backcountry farmlands. Some of these encounters were more supernatural in nature. This one, in particular, was the least of this world. But probably one of the scarier experiences, honestly. It happened over the course of a month. It started out as it always did. Late at night, around midnight, there are no street lamps, and all the neighbors are about 20 acres apart, so it's very dark and very quiet, and of course secluded. You can slightly hear the cars on Highway 75. 4 miles away, it's so quiet out there. So I'm on my porch enjoying a smoke, scrolling on my phone. I keep the porch lights off in the summertime because it attracts mosquitoes and June bugs. The light from the phone made it hard to see anything in front of me, but my dog was hanging out by my side the whole time. So not only did I know it was safe, but I also had something guarding me, in chance of some monster came out to try to get me. I say monster because in over 20 years of living in the neighborhood, no person or wild animal ever bothered anyone. You'd maybe hear coyotes howl between 11 and 1 a.m., but they don't dare go near humans. Any fear I would ever have out there was if monsters were real, and I've yet to see one, so I wasn't too concerned about my surroundings. As I'm engrossed in my phone, I hear to the right of me, rustling in the grass. In fact, it sounded as if something large was out there, maybe about my dog's size. It sounded like something was dragging itself slowly, on its belly right for me. My first thought was, man, my little doggo is being silly. She must want my attention, and I chuckled to myself. Not that she was little. That was more of a term of endearment. She was a tri-colored pit bull. I tried to look up from my phone to see her in action, but my eyes, as mentioned before, had trouble adjusting to the dark. And that second, from the left of me, mind you, that I had thought my dog was to the right, to the left of me was my pit bull, running as fast as she could, from the backyard out from the side fence, barking and growling louder than I ever heard before. Just as my eyes adjusted, I caught a glimpse of something gray and sleek and fast, and just about the same size as my dog, but much, much skinnier and much quicker, almost like it was emaciated. Something went tearing off into the night, my dog on its heels. She chased her to the pond on the 7-acre property. She came back partially wet, her fur still sticking straight up, still looking towards the pond to listen for a growl. She's not the type to chase animals. She was the type to play and be sweet. She grew up with kittens and never barked at door knocks or anything like that. After that, I never sat out front at night to smoke at that house. I have now always stayed on the enclosed back porch. A month later, I'm sitting on that porch, listening to coyotes yip and howl. I had decided it must have been a stray coyote though. It looked like it just had mange or something. I was trying to rationalize it. So I'm on that porch, and suddenly the coyotes abruptly stop. I then heard this terrible noise. It sounded like something dying. Like a house cat, but much more guttural. Before I could move, I heard the most terrible scratching sound I've ever heard on the outer wood walls. It was more like a grinding. I ran inside and cowered in my room. The next day, I went out to look at the wall, and sure enough, there were what appeared to be 20 clawed scratches on the wall, some very deep, like they were almost cut with a knife. This happened in Glenpool, Oklahoma. We don't have mountain lions. We don't have bears. Well, not typically. Especially where there aren't any wooded areas like this small town. But I tell you, from what I've seen, these scratches kind of look like how large cats and bears are. There are no woods, no trees, it's all open plains. Where would it live for a month? Does it have a secret burrow by the pond? Now, when I stay at my parents', I never go outside at night unless someone is with me and all the lights are on. I noticed even the cats won't go outside at night. Even the stray cats get under the house and only come out during the day, which is odd for a nocturnal animal. I don't know what it was that was stalking me last summer, but I don't think it was the first time, or at least part of me feels like whatever it was is still lurking around on the darkest nights. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I lived in the mountains, renting a house with just me and my mom. I really liked it up there and still visit it with my dad as he owns it now. I'll tell a story as it all happened in the same week. The first thing that happened was I was going to play with Legos. I think when we moved the box there was a baby rattlesnake behind it. We killed it with a shovel, but it almost bit my mom. The next thing that happened was I was playing outside in the dirt and I saw 2 baby bears in my yard. They didn't do anything except stare at me. I ran inside scared, and when we all went outside, they were gone. The last thing lasted 3 days the first time it happened. I was playing on my mom's old computer when I heard this banging sound. So I went to the kitchen and saw this quote-unquote bear. It was like mutilated and foaming out of the mouth. My mom called the police, and when they arrived, the bear ran off. The second day it was circling our house and tried to get on the roof, but failed and ran off. The third night was the worst. I was sleeping in my mom's room because I was scared of this bear thing, and then we heard scratching on the back door. My mom made me stay in the room, so I did. When she went to the door, it was clawing and banging on the window, so my mom called the police again. This time, they saw it and chased it off into the woods. My mom described it to me. She said it was bloody and had this evil energy coming off of it. It was foaming at the mouth, like it had rabies or something, but it didn't act like it had rabies. We did hear that they found this creature and killed it later on. See, what's weird about it is, it was like skinny and humanoid-like, almost looking like a bear, with thick, shaggy fur. But it had no weight to it. It's weird. It's almost like there was a shell. I don't know. Maybe this isn't a cryptid. Maybe it is. I don't know. I know it's not the scariest story you have ever read, but I think it still qualifies. Okay, I'm 21 years old, but I have experienced this horrific moment when I was just 5. but I somehow remember this very vividly. I was living in Kentucky at the time, and my dad was in the army, so my mom and brother and I were living at the army base. The houses were nice, but they definitely had to be haunted for how long they've been there. I haven't had any paranormal experiences there. This was the only thing I guess you could call paranormal. I was in the living room by myself. I was watching cartoons as any 5-year-old would. My kitchen at the time was right by the living room, so as I'm sitting there, I have this weird feeling, and I feel something staring at me. I instantly froze and did not make any sudden movements. I see at the corner of my eye this big black figure moving. I could tell it was moving slowly, almost as if it was dragging its feet if it had any. I could tell it was black and very tall, but it looked as if it was almost wearing a black coat or something was wrapped around it. I still don't know to this day what the exact features were or what this thing was. Obviously, it wasn't my mom because she's short, and definitely not my 3-year-old brother at the time either. It was tall and lanky and looked like it had claws. It was walking from the kitchen to the hallway back towards our rooms. I was trying to ignore the presence of this thing. I just wanted it to go away. So I closed my eyes and sat very still. After just a few minutes, I opened my eyes and looked over there, and it was gone. I definitely had goosebumps and was scared for my life. I ran back to my mom's room and I was crying because I was just so scared. She asked me what happened, and I didn't tell her what I saw. I was just crying. Recently, I had asked my mom if she remembered that, and she told me she did, and she mentioned how she saw red eyes late at night by her TV one time, when she was trying to sleep. This wasn't the only time I've ever had paranormal encounters, and not the scariest, but this was my first. It may sound crazy, but I do wish now that I looked at this thing, just to see what would have happened and where it went. I used to have these little hunches that this thing lived in our basement. Thanks for listening to these creepy, allegedly true encounters with cryptid creatures sent in by viewers just like you. Now, at the end of the day, it is up to you whether or not you believe in these tales. I'm not trying to convince anyone. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a cryptid story or something else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp, and stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, want to subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about every other major podcasting platform out there. I appreciate you guys as always for sticking it through the entire video. If you made it all the way to the end, the code word today is Blue Transformer. Comment that down below to let me know you made it to the end and to confuse anybody who didn't. I really do enjoy reading your incredibly funny comments that you guys come up with these code words. It's super fun and entertaining. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video. Oh, and one last thing. I do apologize for being a little late on uploads recently. I've been feeling really tired, and I'm just trying to take care of my health so I don't get into, some kind of burnout and end up leaving you guys with nothing. So I do really appreciate the patience recently. Thank you guys so much.